Alright, my 90's kids, it's time for a new series. Like a lot of you, when I was younger, I was obsessed with American Girl dolls. I was obsessed with the books. I was obsessed with anything I could get my hands on. And my obsession with all things cooking started really early, and so I got all of the cookbooks when I was younger. So this series is going to be all about making the recipes from the cookbooks. And one of my favorite American Girls to start out with was Molly, because she had glasses and I wanted glasses, and so I just wanted to be her. And I love the fact that she tap danced. I love the fact that she lived in the 40s and her outfits were just so cute. And so come along with me on this journey of going into my past and going into the past with American Girl dolls and cooking, because I know so many of you have the same story that I do of working with the dolls. Now, the only doll that I had growing up in this time period was Samantha, and then I got an American Girl doll of today that was me, and she had a whole ballet outfit and everything. It was amazing. But once I got into being an adult and got national board certification as a teacher, what I did with my first big check as a national board certified teacher was I went onto eBay and bought all of the American Girl dolls that were available when I was younger, because when you're an adult with an adult money that has absolutely 0 cents, we do things like that. So as we go through this series, you're going to see all these dolls, but the only one that is actually from my childhood is Samantha. The rest of these are ones that I got on eBay. So I'm going to be telling stories throughout this that are kind of related to being younger. So this Molly's Waldorf Salad is the first recipe that I'm going to try. It was absolutely delicious. It was so very good. And here we go. Let's get started. So another thing I should mention about these videos is that I'm going to be releasing 2 different versions of these videos. So this version is specifically made for adults that are just looking to go back into their past and looking to relive some really fun stuff from their childhood. So this version is going to be used so that you can follow along with what you are capable to do as an adult. I am going to be releasing a video on YouTube Kids that is available that's going to say things like, let an adult help you do this. So just keep in mind that simultaneously I'm releasing 2 videos on the channel. So if you want to make this along with your kids, check out the other video that I'm releasing at this time that's going to say, hey, do this at this time, and this is going to be a much cleaner, much shorter video that's designed for you to be able to do this along with your kids. Now, one thing that I'm doing on this video that's like kind of funny is obviously I've got my own techniques for doing things, but I'm literally going to the recipe and reading it as it's written. And so I'm using things that I haven't used for quite a while because I have my own ways of doing things from being trained. So as you're seeing, I am coring an apple right now. I don't ever core apples. It's just not something I've ever felt the need to do because I just cut around it and then like eat off the core or whatever. And so, yeah, my apple core is just not the best because it's the one that's in my kit from culinary school. It is a pain in the butt. So I am following the recipe exactly, but I don't really recommend that you follow this way of doing things. I recommend you just cut off the sides of it. I do actually like the peels in this recipe, so that's just something that adds a little bit of crunch. But if your kid doesn't like peels, then peel the apples. So that's just something to keep in mind. The Granny Smith apples are super good in this, but if you don't like the sourness of those, you can use whatever apples that you enjoy. But yeah, I don't recommend coring apples because it's just not enjoyable at all. But the first step in the recipe says to core the apples. Just cut off the sides, so it'll be fine. The other thing you can do if you have it is use one of those apple slicer things that you have that has the core built into it that you just shove it down on top of it. So that's an option as well. I thought about using that, but since a lot of people might not have those, but just keep in mind that that's a great way to slice it really quickly if you want to, and then cut the apples into chunks after you finish with that. So this was the part of the process where I was like, okay, this illustrator was really having some fun because why in the world did they use this picture? But their next step was to like cut the apple into rings and then cut it into chunks. I do not understand this process. It's probably the least efficient way to cut apples into rings. So I did it this way to begin with, but especially if you're working with kids, this is just not a very safe way to cut apples. Chances of them rolling or anything like that when you're cutting into slices is just not very safe. So we're going to go through a better way to cut these in just a moment, just because I just want your kids to be safe. Now in this section, I'm using a regular knife, just because it's what we're all used to, but I'm going to show you a trick in just a minute for what you can do with your kids that makes things a little bit easier so that you know that your kid is going to be safe in this process. Just keep in mind that this cutting them into rounds thing, not it. The illustration was super cute though. So this is basically where I said I'm going to cut things the way that I normally do. So you're basically just cutting around in a fan shape and then cutting those into chunks, and that keeps them in a generally even size, bite-sized piece. Now if you have smaller kids, you want to cut them into pieces that are going to work for their little tiny mouths, but this is basically a size of preference. So right here is where we kick into the part that works great for your kids. So if you want to get them involved in this process and start teaching them a little bit of knife skills, you can absolutely use a standard butter knife to cut into apples. And it generally helps a little bit more if you are cutting through the skin first. Now, if you want to peel these to begin with, it's just fine, but it takes a little bit of sawing, it takes a little bit of work. And what I recommend in this process is if you're trying to just get through the process as quickly as possible, but do get them involved, you cut most of the apples and just let them cut 1 or 2 pieces. So maybe let them cut 1 apple and you cut the rest. But that way they learn the skills without actually risking cutting themselves. And just stay on top of them. But a butter knife is not going to cut them, and they're going to be a lot safer. And a lot of people don't really realize how much that will work for this process. So just keep in mind that that works just fine. You can also, it takes a lot longer, but they can cut each of these little individual apple slices like that, and it'll work fine. So just continue on with this process, and they will be able to be involved and have a great time making something and practice their knife skills. And then have them practice all of the safety measures and things that you would do with a regular knife. And then when they're old enough to actually handle that with their motor skills, then you will be able to let them handle a real knife and stay right on top of them, make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, but you'll be good. So you're just going to continue cutting up the rest of your apples, and it's 4 apples total, but this recipe is really easy to multiply up or down based on how much you think you're going to make. So the next thing you're going to do is measure out a couple tablespoons of lemon juice, and this is a great opportunity to teach your kids about measuring. You don't measure over top of a bowl, but this is not something that's vitally important to make sure you measure accurately, but measure over something else. And you're just measuring out 2 tablespoons. This is going to keep your apples from browning, which with Granny Smith's is not typically that big of a deal, but if you're using something like red apples or yellow apples, they will brown pretty quickly, so this is just going to protect that from happening. And you want to stir that around to coat just to make sure that everything is covered. So with the celery, you can cut that just like the apples with your regular table knife. And you want to cut both ends off the celery and toss those into whatever garbage bowl you've got. You can cut the entire thing and cut it into thinner pieces, but what I have found, and you'll see me doing this in the video, is that if you cut the celery into shorter pieces, it's a lot easier to manage. And even as a full-blown adult, it's easier, but especially as a kid, if you're working with shorter section, it's going to be easier to deal with. And as a parent, you might want to cut it into those shorter sections for your kid to deal with to begin with. But cut that into thin strips, and then you're going to cut the strips into cubes. And you want these to be a little bit smaller than your apples, but you're just going to carry through with cutting up all of your celery. And you're going to be cutting up 3 ribs of celery and just adding that into your bowl. So then you're going to measure out your mayonnaise, and one thing that I've realized about measuring out anything like mayonnaise or peanut butter or shortening or something is that if you use a clear measuring cup, you can see the bottom of it really well, and you're going to scoop that out with a rubber spatula into that. I do remember being younger and reading these cookbooks, and at the beginning of each one of them there's like this little section that teaches you little hints on how to cook, and they're all kind of geared towards the time period that each American Girl is from. And I always loved reading the Molly ones because it talked about rationing and how like a lot of these things were from a victory garden, and then more convenience foods were coming into play, and I just loved reading all of the different stories having to do with that. So the recipe says to put the walnuts on top of the Waldorf salad, but I like to have a little bit mixed in as well just because it makes it a little bit crunchier. Obviously, if you're allergic, leave those out, or you can add any type of nuts. And for this one, I'm using my Mima's measuring cup that I still have. Very appropriate for the time period. I think almost everybody has this particular set of measuring cups. I teach in a high school that is a family consumer science classroom, and we still have some of these measuring cups in my classroom that are probably here from when our school was built. And so I love having the history of that. I absolutely loved using things when I was making these recipes when I was younger that were from whatever time period it was from, and so as I was getting ready to film the videos, I was trying to find things that were generally from that time period, but honestly, Molly's time period was the one that I had the least amount of things from that time period because my stuff was mostly older. So obviously, since this is the 1940s, we're going to serve our Waldorf salad on some lettuce from our victory garden. And so you serve the Waldorf salad on top of there, and then you sprinkle a few walnuts on top. And I absolutely loved eating this recipe as well. It tastes super amazing. Highly recommend trying this one out and going back into your history of being a 90s kid, and keep looking out for more recipes from the American Girl cookbooks. Let us know in the comments below who your favorite American Girl was, if you had the cookbooks, and what recipes that you'd like to see us try if you did have the cookbooks. If you do have them, I strongly recommend that you go and get them out, or go back to your parents' house and go and find them. It will definitely be a ton of fun. I can definitely tell why this is one of the recipes that was included in Molly's favorites. It is crunchy, it is a little bit sweet, it has a little bit of savory nature with the mayonnaise. It's amazing, and I hope that you try it. Thank you so much for joining us on Mixing with Mercs, and make sure to check out our other video that's going to be directions designed just for you and your kids to watch.